President Trump walked out of a meeting with top Democrats Wednesday. He was supposed to meet with House Speaker Nancy Pelosi and Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer to discuss infrastructure, but instead told them he won't work with their party until they drop investigations of him in half a dozen House committees. CBS News Chief Congressional Correspondent Nancy Cordes has more on what happened.
What they've done is abuse.
The long-planned meeting lasted about 3 minutes and ended with a presidential brush-off.
To watch what happened in the White House would make your jaw drop.
Congressional sources say the president walked into the cabinet room 15 minutes late and didn't shake hands or sit down. He accused House Speaker Nancy Pelosi of saying something terrible about him and left.
He just took a pass. And it just makes me wonder why he did that.
President Trump says it was this comment this morning that set him off.
And we believe that the President of the United States is engaged in a cover-up.
He took to the Rose Garden to vent his frustration.
And instead of walking in happily into a meeting, I walk in to look at people that had just said that I was doing a cover-up. I don't do cover-ups.
It's a loaded term, reminiscent of Watergate.
And you're maintaining that you had no knowledge of the cover-up?
I had no part in any cover-up.
In this case, Democrats say cover-up refers to White House aides stonewalling on subpoenas and ignoring hearings.
It simply cannot be the case that the executive branch gets to decide what witnesses will appear, what documents they'll agree to produce.
Today's walkout may not have been the first.
When Leader Pelosi said she didn't agree with the wall, he just walked out.
But infrastructure is one of the few areas where they do have common ground.
Maybe it was lack of confidence on his part that he really couldn't match the greatness of the challenge that we have. In any event, I pray for the President of the United States.
And Nancy Cordes joins me now from Capitol Hill. So, Nancy, what are Democrats saying on Capitol Hill about what took place?
Well, House Speaker Nancy Pelosi sent out a letter to her colleagues in the House a short time ago. She said that basically he had a temper tantrum, and a lot of Democrats are taking her lead, not just on that, but on the notion that he is now engaged in a cover-up. That is language that we heard echoed from multiple Democrats throughout the day after she said it. But beyond that, Democrats are arguing that the real reason that the president walked out of that meeting doesn't actually have anything to do with what Nancy Pelosi said about him, because she's critical of him on a fairly regular basis. They argue that the reason that he walked out is because he knows that he can't sell a $2 trillion infrastructure package to his own party, that they are not going to be in favor of that kind of spending. And so Democrats claim that this was all sort of a strategy for him to try to find a way out of this discussion.
Well, infrastructure was one of the few areas where there could have perhaps at one point been some bipartisan agreement. Is that discussion pretty much over at this point?
It's certainly on hold, and it's pretty par for the course when it comes to this White House and Democrats. They really have not been able to find consensus on a whole host of important issues, criminal justice reform being the lone and very notable exception to that rule. And in this case, yes, the White House and Democrats have always favored a big infrastructure package, but they were always going to have a very difficult time getting to the finish line because they have such different ideas about how to pay for it.
So do we know if Speaker Pelosi has any second thoughts about using that term, cover-up?
She had no second thoughts about it. In fact, she used it again a couple of hours later in an appearance that she did at the Center for American Progress. So she is certainly not backing down. And Democrats argue that it's perfectly reasonable to use the term because the president himself has urged White House aides not to cooperate with congressional subpoenas. Democrats argue you don't get to do that. You don't get to pick which subpoenas you cooperate with. And they're getting a boost in the courts. There's now been a second ruling from a federal judge, this time in New York, who said that actually Congress does have the right to demand the president's financial records from Deutsche Bank and Capital One. The president and his children had actually filed suit to try to block those banks from cooperating with congressional subpoenas, and this judge has now ruled, just like one did a few days ago, that Congress does have very broad powers to try to get documents like this if it feels that they're necessary.
And Nancy, earlier Wednesday, Speaker Pelosi met with House members to discuss investigations into the president. What is the appetite for impeachment at this point?
There is definitely a growing appetite for an impeachment inquiry to at least open up an impeachment proceeding so that Congress would have broader investigative powers and also to show the White House how serious it is. But I would say that the majority of the party still believes that it's better to do all of these separate investigations in different House committees, a half dozen of them, and look at impeachment proceedings down the road. And Pelosi certainly made that case in the meeting with Democrats, and most of them seem content to follow her lead on this for now. They believe that if you jump to impeachment right now, that you're essentially sending a message that Congress can't get the documents it needs any other way other than resorting to impeachment proceedings. They think that that's a bad precedent to set, especially when they are having some success in the courts right now.
All right, Nancy Cordes for us. Nancy, thanks.
You're welcome.